Hello, my name is Allison, and today we will be discussing the structures and functions of the brain. First, I would like to discuss the cerebrum. This is the largest and most complex part of the brain. The cerebrum is divided into two cerebral hemispheres. These hemispheres control many of the brain's functions. Throughout the hemispheres, you will find gyruses and sulcuses within the surface. This is the part that people usually think of when they think of the brain. They think of all of those grooves and sort of wrinkles and folds. That's what these gyruses and sulcuses are. They are folds and grooves within the brain's surface. There is a central sulcus that runs across the brain horizontally, while there's also a lateral sulcus that runs top to bottom in the brain. These are more main folds and grooves within the brain that help divide the hemispheres and part of the lobes. The cerebrum also contains the arbor vitae, a mass of white matter that moves sensory and motor information from the cerebellum. The arbor vitae is this structure in red here below the text. The outer layer of the cerebrum is known as the cerebral cortex. And continuing here with the cerebrum, we're going to discuss the lobes. There are 4 lobes within the cerebrum: the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and frontal lobe. You can see them divided up here on this picture a little bit more clearly. You can see that the frontal lobe is much bigger than the occipital lobe. There's also a structure within the cerebrum known as the corpus callosum. This structure connects the brain's 2 hemispheres. And next we'll discuss the 4 lobes in a little bit more detail. The parietal lobe, which was in the middle of the occipital and the frontal lobe here. This is the somatosensory cortex of the brain. The frontal lobe is where Broca's area is located. This area is responsible for speech. That is communication as far as understanding and repeating it. The occipital lobe is the primary visual cortex of the brain, so it helps understand and see your vision. The temporal lobe encodes memory and helps bring those back up. Next, we will discuss the diencephalon. This structure is the central portion of the brain. You can see here it's a little cutout of the brain where it shows the diencephalon. It does surround the third ventricle, and it is divided into 4 parts: the epithalamus, the thalamus, the subthalamus, and the hypothalamus. Those are all pictured here. Now we will discuss the midbrain. This is the uppermost part of the brain. It is the connection between the brain and spinal cord, and the midbrain has 3 main parts: the colliculi, the tegmentum, and the cerebral peduncles. The next structure of the brain is the cerebellum. It is located at the back of the head above the brainstem, so this area kind of here in this little graphic. This part of the brain helps maintain and use movements and coordination. It is the primary motor cortex of the brain. And the outside of the cerebellum is the cerebellar cortex. This helps protect the cerebellum. The next structure we will discuss is the pons. This structure connects the thalamus with the medulla oblongata, and it helps control the body's automatic processes such as breathing, blinking, your heart beating, things that you don't really have to think about. And you can see the pons here in the middle of the midbrain and the medulla. And next we will be discussing the medulla that is down here. It is the bottom part of the brain. And as you saw in the previous picture, it holds a key in the nerve conduction through the brain. It helps tie those nerves into the brain and is where the processes from those begin. It helps with automatic processes as well, such as breathing and your heart beating, just as the pons did. This is also where the brain's tracts connect into the brain, where we discussed previously in class about decausation and movements and feelings within the body. That is where these tracts connect. Next, we're discussing the blood circulation in the brain. The brain intakes blood from two types of arteries, the carotid arteries and the cerebral arteries. Due to these two main arteries being the main supplies of blood, they form a sort of circular track around the brain. And this is how blood is supplied to the brain. Lastly, I will discuss the CSF, or the cerebral spinal fluid. This is a clear, watery liquid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. The function of the CSF is to cushion the brain and spinal cord and to remove waste products as well. CSF is produced by cells in the ventricles of the brain. CSF circulates through the ventricles, the cisterns, and the subarachnoid space, then is lastly absorbed into the blood, where it will be taken away and disposed of. You can see in this picture here, it shows some tracks, how it goes through the brain and then down through the spinal cord. Next up is a pop quiz. I'll give you guys about a minute, 30 seconds to read over this, and we will go over the answers then. All right, that should have been enough time for everybody. If you do need more time, feel free to pause this video and take whatever extra time you need for this. But next we will be going over the answers. All right, so number one, the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. That was one of the first things we went over today. Number two, the cerebral spinal fluid acts as a cushion for the brain and spinal cord, as well as removing waste products. Keep in mind that it does remove waste products. That's one that people tend to forget about. And number three, the medulla helps with the automatic processes such as your heart beating, breathing, blinking, all of that good stuff. Lastly, I just wanted to bring attention to this awesome graphic I found on WebMD. I thought it was a great study tool, and I do recommend screenshotting this to use as a study tool for the upcoming exam. If you have any questions on this, let me know down below. I have my citations here as well as WebMD, where I did receive a lot of this information aside from the lecture